Many people can't start their day without a cup of coffee. And when you think about it, we wonder, where does it come from? Where does coffee come from? How does it get into our coffee cup? What's the process from the coffee bean to the ground coffee we buy to make a cup of coffee at home? We're in Cranberry Township here in Butler County at Kiva Han Coffee. They're importers and exporters of coffee. They have operations internationally in Saudi Arabia, for instance. And we'll learn about Kiva Han Coffee and the whole coffee process and how it ends up in our cup every morning. Let's talk with the founder of Kiva Han Coffee, Ed Wesley. He's the president and founder. What does the name Kiva Han mean? Where did it come from?
Well, Kiva Han means coffee in, and it comes from the Middle East. And Kiva Han literally was the first coffee bar, opened in Constantinople in 1471. And Kiva Han, as the first coffee bar, was the place that people went to learn about coffee. Constantinople was sort of the New York City of its day. And so new ideas, new concepts started there, just like they do in New York today. And so we own that name, we own the trademark internationally, and we operate as today's Kiva Han.
Now, you're a coffee roaster here. You do your own roasting. You import coffee. I know you travel around the world visiting coffee plantations. Tell us where you go and what you really look for.
What you want to look for, we roast Arabica coffee. So there are two types of coffees grown in the world, two varieties. There's Robusta coffee and there's Arabica coffee. Big difference between the two. We look for Arabica coffee and we look for the highest grade Arabica coffee. So when I travel, I'm going to meet with the farmers that are growing the coffee. I want to find the best coffee that we can find in the world. So I've been to Africa, I've been to Central and South America, and I love traveling to find great coffees.
When you find a plantation that's growing coffee, what determines in your mind what makes it a good coffee?
Altitude is very important. So depending on where in the world that coffee is coming from, that is probably the first thing I look for is altitude, the care that they give the coffee. You know, it's an agricultural product. How do they take care of the trees? How do they trim the trees? How do they harvest the coffee? What do they do when they process the coffee? There's a lot of things that go into coffee to make great coffee.
There are hundreds of coffee companies around the world. Don't all of them go to the same plantations that you go to?
No. It is. We are a smaller coffee company. We're probably the biggest in the Pittsburgh area doing what we're doing. We're an international company, actually. We actually have stores in Saudi Arabia. And no, they don't do what we do. I would say that we are a gourmet roaster. So we're specifically looking for the best quality coffee. And so when you're talking a Starbucks or a lot of the companies out there, they're buying so much coffee, they're not able to buy strictly the highest quality.
There are many, many, many coffee shops around the country, as you just mentioned. They all say they're special. They all say they're gourmet. How do we know that your coffee is really what you say it is?
Well, you want to try it. I think that's the best thing. How does it taste? And people get that pretty quickly. If they're looking for great coffee and they try it, and once they get to know great coffee, you can taste it in the cup.
Let's talk about the process of making coffee. I know you've got some big machines over here, and behind us, bags of coffee, and there are coffee bags all over the place. How do you start to make the coffee that you sell or brew? And tell us about the process.
So, first of all, you start with the coffee. The coffee needs to be harvested fresh. So it is very important that the beans that we select are from this year's harvest, that they've come in fresh. So that's the first thing we start with. We also want to get beans that, when we buy beans, we could buy Arabica beans that are smaller. We want to buy the largest beans, very few defects, because really where you get your flavor in the coffee is there's oil in the bean. And that oil makes up 0.5% of the bean. So the larger the bean, the fewer the defects, the fresher the coffee, you're going to get better coffee. Then we have to roast it here. So when we roast that coffee, it's very important that we roast it to the right temperature for each coffee. We will also blend those coffees that we get in to create unique flavors. So that's what it starts with. And then you have to brew it right. So we've done all of those things. A coffee shop then will get that coffee, and we will also teach them how to brew it properly, how to make the right espresso. And so we help them with everything to get there.
So you do all of that, but all that depends on taste, and everybody's taste is individual. How do I know that your selection based on your taste is something that I'll like?
Just taste it. I think that if you taste our coffee, you're going to see that everything that we put into it to bring it to you, you're going to find a great cup of coffee. And when you get that coffee, it's really important that you keep it fresh, that you want to use it when you get it. You don't want it sitting on the shelf for 2 months and then grind that coffee and brew it. You're not going to have great coffee.
Let's start from the ground coffee. Whether I grind it myself or I buy a pound of coffee in the store or from you that's already ground, what's the best way to make a cup of coffee?
There are different ways to make a cup of coffee. I love a French press. Absolutely love a French press. And there are so many different ways to do it. I would say that, you can get just a traditional brewer at home, Mr. Coffee. As long as you're buying great coffee, as long as you're using it with, even if it's ground in the store or if it's ground here by us, as long as you use that within about a week, you're going to have great coffee. Also, storing it. It's better to store it in an airtight container. One of these things that you can clamp down the lid, get the air out of it, because air damages the coffee. The oils are going to evaporate from the coffee. You're going to lose your flavor. So those are some of the things you can do to guarantee that the coffee that we bring you is great.
Behind us are thousands of pounds of coffee in these big bags. Who do you sell them to?
We sell coffee to roasters. We sell this coffee to roasters. So this coffee is a coffee that we bought in Peru. This comes from a small farm in Peru. And so it's much like wine that comes from a single vineyard. This comes from a single farm. So it's an extraordinary cup of coffee. We have a relationship with the farmer, and we will sell this to our customers, and we'll also sell it to other roasters that are looking for tremendous coffee.
You implied a few minutes ago that there's a tasting process. Somebody has to decide that the taste of your end product is what you want it to be. Who are these people?
We actually cup the coffee. So before we even get this coffee, we'll get a sample of the coffee from the farm to determine if it's actually something that we want to buy. So when we cup it, and you'll see that, we actually have a cupper here that is going to cup the coffee and make sure that this is coffee that we want to bring in, and it meets our standards.
Ed, where can people buy your coffee?
We sell to coffee bars. That's our primary customer base. Plus, you can buy us online. You can go to our website and buy coffee. People can stop in here and buy coffee. And a lot of people don't know that. And we get a lot of people that stop in here. They want to get the coffee fresh, right from the roasting facility.
Ed, when they go to a coffee bar, will they know that it's Kiva Han Coffee?
Not always. A lot of our customers want to do private label. If you ask them if they sell Kiva Han Coffee, they'll tell you if they sell Kiva Han Coffee. But a lot of people want to market their own name.
Tell us your website.
Our website is kivahan.com.
Ed, I think there's a lot more we want to learn about Kiva Han Coffee and your operation here in Cranberry Township. So let's meet some of your other folks and visit some of the other spots here. Thanks, Ed.
Perfect. Thank you, Larry.
There's a process here at Kiva Han Coffee called cupping. It's a way they measure the quality of the coffee, the taste of the coffee. And Ted Cunningham is the cupper, the guy who does the cupping. He's also the business manager here. Ted, what does cupping mean?
It's just a way of scoring coffee so you can decide which ones you want to purchase. Just like if you were, deciding on a bottle of wine, a 93 is a better quality wine than an 85. We do the same things with coffee.
So is this the way you make sure that the consistency that comes out of the Kiva Han house is the same?
Absolutely.
So what is the cupping process? How do you do it?
Well, first we take some roasted coffee beans and we grind them and put them into a cupping cup, which in this case is much like a cocktail glass, and grind it, and then we add hot water, and after a 4-minute period, then we will go through the cupping process using a cupping spoon, which is completely different than as you actually took a cup of coffee and drank it, because we don't actually swallow the coffee. we'll aspirate it through our mouth and spit it out in a cup.
Which is kind of the way they taste wine.
Yes.
So when you do that, how do you know one from the other? How do you know how to score that coffee?
Cupping, like any other thing, is something you have to acquire the knowledge over time. Somebody who does it for the first time is really not going to be very comfortable and very accurate at it. It's just something you do over, we do it on a weekly basis with all of our coffees, and over time, you acquire the skill set to be able to tell the differences between it and what's a good coffee versus one that has defects. You might have 3 perfectly good ones, but which one is the best coffee?
Well, Ted, let's show us how the process works. Can you do some cupping right here in front of us?
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned, the first thing we did is we weighed out the coffee, and for us, we're using 12 grams of coffee and put it through the grinder into the cupping glass. And then from there, we're going to take boiling water, and we're going to add the boiling water to the coffee. And I'll do a second one in case you'd like to cup. And then we're going to let this sit for 4 minutes before we are going to take it and aspirate it and start to taste it. And one of the things you can do before you put the water, and what a lot of people do before that, is actually smell the coffee before you put the water to get for the aroma, see if you get any pleasant aroma notes, see if there's any defects you can detect with your nose.
Now, when you get a bag of coffee from, let's say, Peru, and you get a bag of coffee 3 weeks later from that same grower, wouldn't the quality be exactly the same?
Yeah, it could be, and it could not be. There's a lot of different variables that go on. So that's one of the things people will cup, before they actually purchase the coffee from that grower in Peru, and then they'll also cup it after it comes in to make sure they got the same quality that they had paid for in the first place.
Does it make a lot of difference if it takes a month or 6 months for the coffee to get here from the plantation?
That would depend upon how it's bagged. There are different methods for bagging coffee. Some allow it to be in storage much longer than others. So, and then obviously if there's any damage to the coffee while it's in transport, like it gets wet, that would definitely damage the coffee.
So this is a quality control process, and your palate is the one that determines whether a cup of coffee is up to standards here. Do you find many times that it's not?
Actually, no, because it's also our coffees before we buy them are also being cupped by other people, whether they're our own employees in country, whether they're other importers that we use, say out of the Port of New York. So by the time it gets to me, there's probably been 3 or 4 other places it's already been cupped.
It seems to me, because you have so many different kinds of coffee here, you're tasting different kinds of coffee, cupping different kinds of coffee practically every day. Your palate has to be very sensitive.
Yes, it does. And that's why one of the reasons I like to cup in the morning before I drank coffee all day long, so it's a nice fresh palate ready to go.
Are we ready to actually go through the cupping process then?
Yes, we are ready.
All right, let's see what you do.
So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to what we call break the crust, which is what's floating at the top of the cup here, and we're going to smell it and see if we can detect any pleasant or unpleasant notes with our nose before we go and use our mouths. Now, once we've done that, the next step we'll do is we'll actually take the coffee off the top. So you asked the question about the filter. This is why we're not going to use a filter. Some of the coffee has gone to the bottom. The coffee that's on the top, we're going to just take out with our spoon so we have nice clean coffee without any grinds. And when we're cupping, we always have a glass with water, because you don't want to contaminate. So if I'm moving from glass to glass, I don't want to use the same spoon in the different glasses. I don't want to contaminate that individual glass. And the coffee will change. The characteristics of the coffee will change as it cools. So you don't just taste it once. You want to taste it multiple times as it's cooling down, and you'll get completely different tastes from it. So we're going to do what we call slurping the coffee, or aspirating it, because you want to get it sprayed throughout your mouth. In the front and the back.
Was that pretty good?
Yes, but for new timers, the one thing that they don't quite understand is you don't drink the coffee. You're going to aspirate it around your mouth and then spit it out.
And this coffee was as good as you wanted it to be?
Yes, it was. This is an Ethiopian natural Sonamo that we're cupping today. And so normally what you would do is you would have, if this was an individual coffee, we would have at least 3 up to 5 different cups of the same coffee, so that if you had a defect in a particular bean and it offset one cup, you wouldn't notice in the other 2 or 3 or 4. So you're not just having a single cup and letting one bean ruin the whole thing.
So the cupping process that you just went through takes 4 or 5 minutes, 4 minutes of the water, the hot water, and then you're tasting it and slurping it and getting an idea whether it's up to the standards that you want it to be. And you do this with 4 different cups, did you say?
You want to do 3 to 5 cups of this if you're doing the same coffee, but then also you may be cupping 3 different Ethiopians from different regions or different process methods. So it's really dependent. It's not necessarily always the same coffee. It could be different types of coffee.
Or you've gone through this process. Now, how do you actually score the coffee?
Well, there's 4 main categories besides aroma that you're looking at with the coffee. One is acidity, which is the sweetness or the sharpness of the particular coffee. It's where you get a lot of the floral, fruity notes. Like, is it lemony? Is it kind of taste? It's best described like if you put some lemon juice and water in a cup. How much sugar do you add to the point where it comes to a perfect balance with the acidity of that lemon? There's also the body, which would be how does it feel on your tongue? It's like a viscosity of the oil. Is it light on your tongue, heavy on your tongue? Well, how much body does it have? And then the last would be the finish, where after you've drank the cup of coffee, how does it taste after a bit of time? And so what you're looking for is a well-balanced coffee where it has the right amount of acidity, the right amount of sweetness, and a good body feel on your tongue. And then also, the initial taste is just as good, 2 minutes down the road with the finish.
Can't imagine many people or any people viewing this program today realize what goes into making a good cup of coffee or a good pound of coffee. Ted, thanks very much. Really, really interesting.
You're welcome.
So let's learn about the roasting process here at Kiva Han Coffee. Steve Ozarski is the roaster in charge of this big machine behind us. How often do you roast coffee?
We roast every day. With the demand that we have, this is one of the roasters that we currently use. We're doing about 700 to 800 pounds of coffee a day.
Let's talk about the whole process. You start with coffee beans that are determined by who wants to buy them, I guess. And what do you do with the coffee beans? How does the whole roasting process work?
You start basically with the green beans, and they come from different countries. South Africa, Costa Rican coffees. We do a lot of Brazil. Depending on the mix and what the customer is looking for, we have anywhere from a light roast, a medium roast, we go to a dark roast, and then all the way up to a French roast. Now, the darker the roast, it changes the flavors of the coffee. Now, for somebody that's looking for a lot of the flavor in the coffee and the texture of the coffee, we recommend the lighter roast. The darker the roast gets, the more you start to taste the smoky, the chocolatey flavor of the roast versus the flavor of the bean.
So the roasting process really determines the flavor of the coffee, doesn't it?
Absolutely, it does. And a lot of people are misconceived because they feel that the darker the coffee, the stronger it is. When in actuality, the darker the coffee is roasted, the less caffeine it actually has.
How do you know exactly how much time to roast the coffee?
We go through samples when we first get in a coffee. We'll go and do some experimental cuppings to come out with the perfect temperature and the amount of time that we have it in the machine. And we generally like to have a medium roast anywhere between about 15 to 17 minutes.
Is there like a recipe book where you have all that? You know, where certain beans has to be roasted a certain amount of time?
No, each time we get a new bean, we have to start from scratch and try. I mean, we have a general idea of what the temperature, because of the darkness of the bean and the color, but you always want to try to go with the temperature of the bean versus just determining what color it is.
When you finish roasting a batch of coffee, do you know that it's successfully done?
Yes, and generally, I watch it as it's roasting along, and there's a couple things you do while you're roasting. One, you can smell it as it changes because it goes through a caramelization period as it's roasting, and then as it gets darker, you can smell the smokiness coming out. So as well as this looks, you can hear it. Coffee has a process called cracking, and it sounds like popcorn. And once it does the first crack, that tells us that it's almost at a medium roast. And that's no matter what coffee bean you're using, it'll go through that process. So at that point is when we want to really start to watch the bean so that we know when to bring it out without over roasting it.
How long have you been doing this?
6 years now.
How did you learn how to do it?
Ed took us out to California and actually took some classes with the SCAA on roasting, and then a lot of books.
Technology usually takes over industries quicker than we think. Is there going to be a faster way or a better way of doing this in 5 or 10 years from now, do you think?
There are faster ways now. We prefer to do small batch coffees. I mean, in the specialty coffee industry, that's where you're going to get the flavor. Somebody that cares and looks at how many times they want to roast it, what temperature, how many minutes. If you get into just roasting in bulk, you can basically get to where all the coffees start to taste the same.
So that's the difference between small batch coffee like here at Kiva Han and maybe some of the bigger national brands?
Yes. And we tailor each coffee. We make sure before we roast it that we do cup it and pick the certain beans that we want to put together. And as you roast it, it loses a lot of moisture. So basically you can start out with 50 pounds, but you're only going to get 42 pounds out. And what happens is the water leaves the bean, and that's when the bean starts to crack. But the oils and the flavors begin to come out at that point.
Are you a coffee drinker?
I absolutely am a coffee drinker.
What's your favorite kind?
That we have is the Guatemalan. Absolutely my favorite.
Steve, thanks very much.
Great, thank you. Have a great day.
We've learned that Kiva Han Coffee is an international organization and does business overseas in the Middle East. And Ayman Shaker is the International Business Development Director. And I know that you're in Saudi Arabia. How did you get into the coffee business over there?
Actually, I am from Syria, and I joined Saudi Arabia working in Starbucks Coffee. And Starbucks Coffee is a well-known American brand. And actually, they are the leader in the coffee business. I don't know coffee, but since I joined Starbucks at 2000 in Saudi Arabia, we try to educate customers and consumers in Saudi Arabia with the coffee.
Now, Kiva Han was introduced over there some years ago. Why Saudi Arabia when there's so much other competition?
Yes, exactly. Once come to Kiva Han Coffee, and which is attracted me is about their quality. So I moved to Kiva Han Coffee because they run the quality business. They run quality products. They do have some unique services, which is you could compete other companies in this field. And nowadays, Kiva Han could compete easily other coffee companies, and we could share a little bit more in the market. It's somehow like we started just recently, last couple or three years, and nowadays we are in very good position because customers and consumers love Kiva Han Coffee.
So they know the difference. They've been going to Starbucks stores before, Starbucks coffee shops before, and when Kiva Han came, they immediately knew the difference?
Exactly. They shift from Starbucks and another coffee shops like Lavazza or Illy Coffee to Kiva Han Coffee because it's easy for any coffee addict and any coffee consumer to recognize what is the best once come to the quality and the standard and the way you serve the cup of coffee and the way you serve him. So it's easy for these customers to shift to Kiva Han. And thanks God that Kiva Han in short time could grab more customers in Saudi Arabia and hopefully in other territories.
Specifically, what other markets are you looking for in the Middle East?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm always a part of my task is always looking for a transparent and a trusted investor in the Middle East and outside of the Middle East, like for example China. And we have a good negotiation in order to come up with this good investors and try to build a long-term and successful ongoing relationship with them. We started in Saudi Arabia, which is our top focus right now, and we have, a couple of stores, and we sign somehow like up to 12 to 15 lease agreement. So I mean that we have right now some stores under constructions, and I do have a good a network because I used to work in that area. So thanks God that I do have a good network, so I could employ and use this network in order to build and expand Kiva Han business there. Like for example, let me give you some examples. We do have connections in Bahrain, in Qatar, in Egypt, in Kuwait, in Jordan, in Iraq. So, and we are looking forward to expand the business like what I mentioned in other territories.
Now, is the coffee, the Kiva Han coffee, served in Saudi Arabia the same Kiva Han coffee that's sold here? Are the taste of the customers about the same?
Yes, we are as Kiva Han Coffee committed and dedicated to deliver a best and perfect cup of coffee across the world. It means once you order a cup of house blend coffee here in the US, you're gonna get the same coffee of house blend in Saudi Arabia.
Now, we've learned here today that not only is the coffee bean right, the roasting process has to be right, and the blending process and all that goes into making coffee has to be consistent. What do you do to make sure that the quality is controlled over there the way it is here?
Yes, it's actually, there's plenty of elements come through. We have a licensee in Saudi Arabia and a company called Ajmal Al Faraid. And I do have a very good professional team led by a regional operation manager. His name is Bashir Abdul Latif. And the owner of that investment, for Kiva Han licensee, is owned by a family, Ahmad and Ali. They are so dedicated to add value to Kiva Han in the Middle East and specifically in Saudi Arabia. We have always open channel of communication and sharing the thoughts, sharing the ideas, and sharing our vision and the strategy in order to keep and in order to be dedicated all the time and to offer the not only the I'm always talking about this. Not only we are as a Kiva Han team offering a cup of coffee. It's about offering a cup of passion. It's a cup of service, a cup of quality. And we are all as Kiva Han team in the US and now in Saudi Arabia, and who knows that gonna be in other territories. We have one goal, we have one mission, we have one word, is to keep receiving high quality of coffee and delivering high quality of coffee to all the consumers.
Thanks very much. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So now you know about that cup of coffee you have almost every morning. We're at Kiva Han Coffee in Cranberry Township here in Butler County, learning about the whole process of producing and processing coffee in this country. I'm Larry Berg. We'll see you next time on Faces and Places.